Turning in your Bibles to Mark chapter 7. We're ready for verse 24. How is everybody this evening? Good. Suzanne and I had an eventful afternoon for a couple of hours. She was off today and she said, "Take me to lunch." Yes, ma'am. So then while we were out, let's go vote. That wasn't as bad as I dreaded it to be. So we went and voted. And I said, well, while we're out, why don't we get a flu shot? And so we got flu shots. So just don't hit me in my left arm. It's good to be alive, and it's good. God blesses us. I thank Jim for his prayer. A wonderful prayer. Mark chapter 7, beginning in verse 24, and actually the next three miracles, the healing of the Greek woman's daughter, or the Syrophoenician, the healing of the deaf man, and the feeding of the 4,000, are, as I said last week, we're going to see a couple more miracles through the book of Mark, but really the first part of Mark, first half, if you will, of Mark, it just seems to be one miracle right after another, right after another, right after another. And they all have a story. They all have a purpose. They all have a reason. But we kind of get to the close of it and we get more to the story aspects, if you will, in the rest of Mark. Not that, like I say, we won't see another miracle or two. These last three, though, teach really one lesson, but you could say with the feeding of the 4,000, you could say a second lesson. The first two especially, in Mark chapter 7, teach that God is for everyone, that Jesus is for all people, not just the Jew, but for all. And that was an important message that really the disciples missed out on. They just didn't understand it. And so Jesus is showing that through two miracles. The first one is, as we said, a Syrophoenician woman, a Greek woman whose daughter is evidently possessed with a demon. And there's several things I want us to look at, if you don't mind. But let's just read verses 24 through verse 30 of Mark chapter 7. And there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know it. It could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be filled first. For it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." And then he said to her, "For this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter." And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. There's a lot of things that for me are just intriguing as we look at this story. Jesus is in a part of Galilee. Matter of fact, this is the last part. We really haven't made an issue of this, but Jesus, in part of his ministry, went up into Galilee and pretty much stayed there. This is the tail end of his Galilean ministry. And for the most part, as some teachers say and some preachers say, he's going to be starting to head towards Jerusalem and head in that direction. But he goes to what would amount to the southeast part of the Sea of Galilee. He finds this lady. He goes into a house. It's interesting. He goes into a house, verse 24 says, and Mark says, he goes into a house, he didn't want anybody to know that he's there. I can't imagine how tired Jesus must have been. Not just the travel, and not just the teaching and the preaching, but the constant push of people upon him that wanted his time, wanted his attention, wanted his miracles. Some wanted to see Him, some wanted to touch Him. You know, it reminds us, even though Jesus was not seeking fame at all, but it reminds us that sometimes, as famous folks say, you know, there's a lot more to fame than you realize, and a lot of it you don't want. Well, like I say, Jesus was not seeking fame, but He was famous in this area nevertheless. And so this woman, though, finds Him. Now, let's think about a couple of things that were going on. In this area, what would you say? A godly area or an ungodly area? It was ungodly. A lot of Greek statues, pagan worship. The likelihood that this woman was truly a believer of Christ would have been that her faith probably would, if she had faith in Christ, would have been in the fact that she had seen and heard, but not in how she had been raised. Because more than likely she was raised as a pagan. But she comes to Jesus. Notice verse 25. Her daughter has an unclean spirit. A demon, if you will. It's referred to as a demon there in verse 30. She is possessed. Demon possession. What do we know about demon possession? Not a lot, really, do we? Found in the New Testament. Found not in the Old Testament. Believed by a lot to be something that was real, and I believe that it was real, but God allowed it for the purpose of Jesus being able to show His power. Now, you know, if you talk to some school teachers, they'll say they've seen demon-possessed children, but you know, it pretty much died. It was dead after. Or we don't see it much. We do see it in a case in the Book of Acts, seemingly that may have been demon-possessed, but nevertheless, this was an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for the woman, it's an opportunity for Jesus, and it's an opportunity for the disciples of Jesus to find out what's going on. Notice that she comes. She came and fell at His feet, verse 25. She is persistent. Now, she's a mama wanting her child to be made well, so those of us that have children, we understand that, right? We want them to be made well. We want them healthy. We want our spouses healthy. She wants her daughter healthy. And so it says in verse 26 that this pagan kept asking Him. Kept asking Jesus. She did not come once and stop and say, oh, well, we asked. Let's forget it. Let's go home. But she keeps on. She keeps coming back. She's sort of like the proverbial bulldog. She just keeps coming. And notice, simply put, her request is, at least for the ability of Jesus, her request is fairly simple. My child has a demon. And I need it cast out. Jesus, knowing who she was and knowing her background, look in verse 27, tests her. Let the children be filled first. For it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Now, think about a couple of things here. Think about if you will, the comparison that Jesus is trying to draw. But think about how that Jesus' statement also was a statement that if she didn't have a faith in Jesus and a persistence about her, she would have stopped and gone home. But she didn't. Because Jesus basically is saying, look, I'm to give what I'm to give to the Jewish people. Look what he says. Let the children be filled first. Is an imagery, is a reference to the fact that I'm really to feed the Jews first. Now, he's not excluding, and by this miracle, we understand that he's really not excluding the Gentile. Now, let me define my term, if you will, for us, for just a minute. When we refer to a Gentile, the world looked at it in New Testament times, first century times, as you were either a Jew or a Gentile. The Greek word that is often translated Gentile just simply means the nations, which would be encompassing of all the other nations. And so, when I use that term, I don't mean it from a standpoint of, trying to classify people, but we're using it from a biblical sense to understand how they viewed it in biblical times. You were either a Jew or you were a Gentile. You were part of the nations. And so Jesus says here, he says, we need to feed the children. We need to feed the Jews. And she talks about how that may be so. But I want us to finish the first or the last part of what Jesus says, because I want you to see something that's just, I'm sure you caught it, but it's just interesting. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Does anybody's version have something different? Puppies. Probably some have. Some of the newer versions, more modern versions, have puppies. Which is interesting. Because dogs in Palestine were not, they weren't the most domesticated animals in the world at that point in time. They were scavengers. They literally were running through the streets and through the land, finding and scavenging any and everything that they could. And so they were not looked at or looked upon as the friendly, fuzzy, little wonderful things that you keep in your house. And so, Jesus, though, uses a term to refer to little dogs or puppies. He doesn't use the term, in the Greek text, he doesn't use the term that refers to the scavenger type dog, but just truly the little puppies. And what do we do? Little puppies and babies. Oh, isn't that cute? And so Jesus says here, he says he doesn't condemn her, and he doesn't really just put her down, but he says, look, I'm to take this to the other folks, to the Jews. But she said, yeah, well, what you're saying may be true. But even the little dogs, she throws the same term back on him. Even the little dogs, even little puppies. He said they eat from the crumbs under the table. They eat, but they eat what's left over. They don't have to have everything. But truly, they can gain something. Jesus commends this woman for this saying, go your way. Jesus, have you ever noticed something? Have you ever noticed how many compliments Jesus gave? He didn't really give a whole lot that we have recorded. This is, if you will, a slight compliment. Go your way. For this saying, go your way. And when she went home, and there she found her daughter laying on the bed. The demon had been taken out of her. Interestingly enough, to note that Jesus did not have to be present, and the little girl evidently did not have to be present in the presence of Jesus, if you'll let me use those terms together, in order to heal this girl. The healers of today, you've got to be present, and they've got to slap you in the head, and they got to make a show of it. Jesus didn't make a show of this miracle, nor of this little girl. He just said, go your way. And your daughter will be all right. And sure enough, she was. Anything else? Like I said, the basic teaching of this is the miracle and the power we see, and we understand that through all the other miracles that Jesus performed that we've been talking about. But the general principle is that Jesus is now showing His folks, His disciples that are with Him, not just for the Jew, but for everybody. And so then the Great Commission after His resurrection, go into all the world and preach the gospel, they could simply say, they could look back upon this incident and say, yeah, we recall when He healed, a Syrophoenician woman's daughter. He was for everybody. He didn't exclude folks. And still go into all the world and preach the gospel. Anything else in there that we missed, maybe?
Do you think the disciples may be confused because here he reaches out to the Gentile woman, but when He sends them out, with 70, He said, don't go to the Gentiles.
Don't go. That's right. That's right. In the limited commission. That's right. So I'm sure there was a confusion. Yeah. In Matthew 15, the
first time you read this, though, it seems like He was a cruel person in the world. The disciples had already told Him about the blood.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. The persistence, the faith, in Matthew 15, you get more of what Jim is talking about with regards to Jesus really kind of pushing her away than you do in Mark's account. And it's not just her persistence in her faith, but let's look at it from Jesus' standpoint for just a minute. Jesus is testing her faith to see, are you just coming to see something? Are you just coming, let's see, do you really believe? Do you really trust? And from her statement, Jesus derives that her faith is real. It's not a fake faith. So, great point. Anything else?
Verse 28 here, start out with Lord, call Him Lord.
Yes, Lord. Uh-huh.
Isn't that the only place that Mark?
I don't know for sure, but if you say so, okay. It seems like that's right, but for me to say definitively, but yeah, it seems sounds right. That would be right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I hadn't thought about that, but yes. Off the top of my head, yes, that sounds right. So yes, that would be interesting to think about the fact that she does yes, Lord, or yes, Master. Because it's probably the word kurios, which means Lord or Master, which then adds to her faith by, in essence, saying, you're the Master, I'm the servant. I'm willing to serve you. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. Anything else? All good. Well, verse 31, Jesus is departing now from Tyre and Sidon, and let's read now through the end of the chapter. Well, yeah, through the end of the chapter. He came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. So he's coming on around southeast Sea of Galilee. Decapolis literally means 10 cities. These were Greek cities. These were, once again, pagan cities. These were not Jews. These were Gentiles. These were the folks that were looked down upon by the Jews. They brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. And he commanded them that they should tell no one. But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. They were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So he goes to Decapolis. These are, like I say, this is basically 10 cities together. I got to thinking about it today, and you know, we think about, you know, this is Nashville, but you got Belmead and Bellevue. You know, you got all these that make up Nashville. Well, you got all those, if you will, 10 cities that make up what is called Decapolis. 10 cities. So they bring him an individual that's deaf, an individual that is unable to speak. Now, I want you to think about several things. I want you to think about mindset. First century mindset is that this man is handicapped. And we would define him as handicapped. They would, boy, I want to tread this carefully, and I don't want to sound like I'm ugly. They would have treated him as a mental handicap, okay? Not just a physical handicap, but a mental handicap. And I don't mean this ugly. That's just the mindset of the folks of that day and age. And so they brought him, and notice Jesus, this miracle. What does Jesus do? Well, it says Jesus put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and he touched his tongue. Jesus touched this man. That's an interesting thought when you get a Jew touching a Gentile. That's a no-no. This is a time Jesus touched a few people, and it's interesting, and we've noted some of those cases through Mark. In Mark chapter 1, there's an instance. In Mark chapter 5, I believe there's 2 instances where Jesus touched people. Now he touches a Gentile. And so he touches him. Notice that he touches puts his finger in his ear, he spits, and he touches his tongue. Spittle has no redeeming value except for a mama with her child, right? You know, it has no redeeming value whatsoever. It has no healing powers. Unless you're, you know, mama, then, you know, I'll come here and let me spit on it. It'll be all right. But in New Testament times, there was a thought that there were some healing properties in spittle. And so Jesus spat, and he touched this man's tongue. And looking up to heaven, he gave Ephphatha, which is Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. This simply means be opened. And immediately his eyes and his ears, were open. His tongue is loosed, and he spoke plainly. Did you catch the miracle? Well, yeah, preacher. He could hear and he could speak. He spoke plainly. There's a miracle in and of itself. How do we develop speech? By hearing. Yeah. We develop speech by hearing. And we take anything, this is a book, song book, and if we're trying to teach anybody how to speak, you know, we keep repeating book, 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 in order to get them to understand, in order to get them to speak it. Right? That's one way. That's one method. That's not the only method, but that's one method of teaching. This man couldn't hear, so therefore, how did he know how to speak? And my understanding is dactylogy hadn't come around yet. Sign language had not come around yet. So, the miracle is, or a miracle, or a part of the miracle is that he speaks, and he speaks plainly. Another miracle. Verse 36, he commanded them that they should tell no one, But the more He commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. I've always been asked, why did Jesus tell them not to tell anybody? And I don't have a definitive answer. And the reason I don't have a definitive answer is because nowhere in Scriptures have I found where it says why He did not tell them. Now, I got some assumptions. One assumption is that He knew that this word was going to get out, and so He just didn't want them to tell anybody. Just kind of let it get out naturally, and folks will come naturally. That's one assumption. And the second assumption could be that if you tell people not to tell it, what do they usually do? They tell it, right? And maybe that was it. And there are other assumptions. I don't know why. I just know He didn't. He told them, don't tell anybody. And like Mark says, the more they told. And so they were astonished at His saying. But notice what they said. He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. He's done all things well. You ever heard that in the song? Yeah. He does all things well. The lesson really is for us is Jesus is the master, Jesus is the man, but Jesus is the miracle worker that was for all people. And He's trying to show that anything else. Well, let's quickly go. I think we can make it. 9 verses in the 8th chapter, and that will kind of get us through all of these, or get us through most of these miracles. In those days, the multitude being very great, having nothing to eat, Jesus called His disciples to Him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them come from afar. Not from a fire, but from afar. Right? There we go. I'm glad somebody caught that. Then His disciples answered Him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7. So He commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He took 7 loaves, gave thanks, broke them, gave them to His disciples to set before them, and they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, He said, set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and He took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and He sent them away, immediately got into the boat with the disciples, came to the region of Dalmathea. Excuse me. Jesus performs another miracle. This is the feeding of the 4,000, not to be confused with the feeding of the 5,000. This is different. Different place, different circumstances, different, if you will, outcome in a lot of ways, and we'll see that in just a second. And so it's different. Jesus says, though, and here's the crux of really what we need to catch. I have compassion on these people. Jesus is a compassionate being. He shows compassion on the multitude. And here's what He's afraid of. Well, they've been with me for 3 days, and no sign of food, nothing to eat. They need something to eat, but I can't send them away, because if I send them away, some of them have come from pretty good distance. They're going to faint or pass out on the way home. And so I can't do that. And so His disciples answered Him, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad? For me, that's a sad question. Why? Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right. Hadn't been long. They forgot. Or they didn't believe. Or they didn't trust. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Wished I did, but I don't. Nevertheless, Jesus, how can you do this? How can you satisfy this? Well, Jesus asked the question, well, how many loaves do you have? Well, we've got 7. Okay. Well, then let everybody sit down. So they sat down, and so Jesus began to feed the folks. You got any fish? Yeah, we got a few small fish. Well, small fish, we would liken them really into sardines. Pickled small fish. That was a staple. And so, well, we've got a few small fish. And so Jesus blessed them, and He said it before them. And so everyone ate. They ate to the fill, and they notice that it says they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now, what's a large basket? Do what? There you go. It depends, on whether you're eating or whether you're carrying it, right? If you're carrying it, here's a large basket. If you're eating it, I want a big basket. The same Greek word that's used here is used in the book of Acts, where, remember, Paul is let down over the wall, a basket big enough to hold a human. That's the same Greek word that's used here as is in the book of Acts. So, we believe then that when he says 7 large baskets, we're talking about large baskets left over. Just a little bit of bread, just a few fish. Jesus has 7 baskets left over. Ample food left over. Just shows the power of Jesus. Just shows the ability of Jesus. Just shows the fact that out of nothing He could make much. And so Jesus fed these folks, and then He immediately left. Well, what's the lesson? Well, the lesson really is, no matter who you are or who you're not forsaken by God. Jesus is still in that southern part of Galilee. He's fixing to leave that now. But He's still there amongst folks that are not, they're pagans. They're not what we would term Christians. They're pagans. They serve a pagan god. They serve idols. They practice pagan worship, which included a lot of different things. Included sacrifices, even children's sacrifices, included prostitution in the name of worship, included a lot of things. And so Jesus feeds these folks, but He fed them out of the compassion of His heart. Jesus felt sorry for people. We always need to have that compassion. And I was really thinking about that today as, like I say, Suzanne and I went out and went to vote and to get our flu shot during lunch. And as we did that, I drove past a guy on the corner asking for money. And I thought, I've seen this all my life. I've been in Nashville, through Nashville for years. But this is beginning to get old hat to me now. I don't think as much about that guy on the corner. Why? Because I see no telling how many each day. And that bothers me that I would get that calloused and get that calloused that quick. Jesus had compassion upon these people. We need to have compassion upon people and help them when we can. We can't help everybody, and we can't help all the time. I know that, and we want to be careful who we help. Absolutely, I'm not saying any of that, but I think we do need to be moved with the plight of people, and that's not just the homeless. That's a good friend or a good buddy that's going through a problem, a sickness, an illness, an issue. That's folks that are having difficulties. We don't need to brush them off. Well, I haven't got time to call them because I've got X, Y, and Z to do. Or I haven't got time to send them a card. Or I haven't got time to make a visit because I've got whatever it is. It reminds us that we need to have compassion upon those that are going through difficult times, no matter who they are, and do what we can to help them. Anything else? Anything I missed? All right. Well, we will begin then next week in verse 11. We will look there. The Pharisees came out. They began to dispute. It's an interesting, if you will, tit for tat about the Pharisees and the leaven of the Pharisees and their role. We thank you for listening. I hope that you have a tremendous week. God blesses you. That you're able to be safe. Let's pray.